A2Pcast for the week of October 23rd, 2013, the Don't Bet Against John Carmack edition. I'm Mike Rifenbury, the editor of Alive to Play. With me, as always, are our writers Josh Hartman and Mike Schupsky. This week, we talk about motion control technology in all of its many forms, what John Carmack's move to Oculus VR means, and what we believe the relationship between VR and motion technology will be in the future. I then make a bold claim that video games are not as edgy as other forms of media, and could in fact go much further. And then we open up the floor to Game of Thrones discussion with its return next spring. What do we want to see in the aftermath of the Red Wedding? Can anything be as exciting, or has the dramatic capital of this series been spent? So let's get into topic number one, motion control technology. We have the Wii Remote from Nintendo, we have the Move controller from PlayStation, or from Sony, and we have the Kinect from Microsoft. Now, the Wii Remote and the Move controllers are just that. They're controllers, they have buttons, they combine classic controller technology with motion tracking. Do we think that that's superior, or is it like another beast entirely? Or is it inferior, even?
Combining the buttons with the
Right.
I would say I prefer that type because it still keeps the element of, DualShock, holding something in your hand and being able to manipulate buttons in order to control what's happening on the screen. Like Kinect, I can appreciate it for trying to be the most forward thinking in terms of no buttons, just movements and control, like gestures with your hands, and your body is basically the controller. I think I'm not too comfortable with dictating a game with that, just swiping and doing all that kind of stuff. I still like the ability to push a button when I need to push a button. So I don't know. I like the idea of having, say, like the Wii Remote, the nunchuck was perfect because it combined the perfect element of you can't see me doing this, but I'm
fishing rod. He's doing a fishing rod.
I'm doing a fishing movement. I'm doing a fishing thing right now.
Mike Schupsky's going fishing.
Yeah. It's like that was perfect. That was the perfect way to combine movement with traditional gameplay mechanics. So
I think it's important to keep in mind the amount of latency that you have on a Kinect as well. Is that the time it takes from you doing the motion to the motion reflected on the screen, particularly when you're navigating menus with it, it's so aggravatingly slow that it just becomes just a terrible experience to have to use it. On the other side of that coin, though, where you have like dance games, and dance games using your entire body and being able to track all of the different points of motion, it definitely wins in that category because the alternatives can only track the controller, and there's a clear advantage to being able to track different parts of your body doing different things. Playroom on the PS4 looks to combine controller use and motion tracking to give a more cohesive experience. Josh, do you think this has a future, or is it going to be largely ignored, like the 6-axis functionality was on the PS3? No one really did much with that, did they? Not of consequence, anyway.
No, nothing really of consequence. I think the game that most effectively used 6-axis was Flower, and Flower is a wonderful little game, but it's hardly a complicated, precise experience. So I'm just not on board the motion train just yet, not because of lack of technology. And I think they can make really great technology that tracks your motion even better and even better. But I think on a fundamental level of the way we make games, we haven't seen a game that's shown us that motion control is an essential and beneficial part of gameplay. So they can come with as many ideas as they'd like. I don't think we can get over that fundamental hurdle of the controller, as we know it, is still the most precise and most efficient way to control games. The way we make games now. The only way we can move past that is not through a creation of a new technology, it's through a complete rethink of how games operate.
Right, but I think that's sort of what Sony's trying to tackle with their PS4 controller, with the Move light on the front of it being read by the new eye camera. And so you have games, again, like Playroom, which there was a piece on IGN by Marty Sleva, I think I'm pronouncing his last name right, last month. He was raving about his experience with Playroom and just how much fun you can have with a controller, and just by using the controls on the controller as a regular controller would, but also in addition to the move functionality and the little touchpad you have on the top and all the little things you can do with that, and how the eye camera would sort of feed back and show you on the screen and then actually put things into the environment around you based on your emotion and how you were using the controller. And I think that, although Playroom itself might not be a kind of revolutionary thing or something that's a lot of fun to play necessarily, I think that sort of thing in the hands of someone really, really smart might have potential.
I think "might" is the most important word there, because I remain unconvinced. I don't see it being able to move past the stage of gimmick or very, very low level functionality. I don't think it could ever become a core part of the game. You can do it to control little things like, and that's really where we see it working best now. Maybe you want to get to the start menu by, swiping your controller to the right or something. But actually making a crucial part of gameplay work with it, I don't think it's going to happen this next generation. I think they're going to keep trying. Maybe they'll get close, but not in the next 5 years.
There was one game on the 360, and I can't remember its name. It was a tank game where, like, the whole game was centered around Connect. And, like, you did this to, like, bring up the targeting thing. You did this to, like, you could, like, slap your team members in the tank like they're NPCs, but, like, pull it together, man. You slapped them or something like that. I remember seeing a gameplay mechanic where you did that, and the game was just a big piece of crap. So, like, it's like Josh said, it's really hard to build an entire game around that system. Like,
yeah,
especially
really.
Connect that has, like, such, like the technology, like the limits of the technology is, like, still very much there. Like, you can't build an entire game with just,
with swiping your
hands
hands
around.
Because it's just not. It's not as good as a controller.
It's not precise. It's not precise enough. Like, the stuff that you had to do. I remember watching some gameplay things. Like, you had to, like, control, like, turn this piston here, or, like, bring down the targeting thing here, or turn to your teammate and do this. Like, it just wasn't precise enough. It wasn't, like, it didn't know what you were doing all the time. And I really wish I could remember this game's name. The fact that I can't means that it was a piece of crap.
This is true.
Trust me. Believe me.
But I still say that even if it were precise enough, it's still annoying and fun for maybe a minute before it gets boring and tiring.
Which I think is why everything we've seen from Rise Son of Rome coming for the Xbox One looks like it would not actually be fun to play. Because it's a game.
The question, Rise was originally like this big Connect game, and I haven't seen them talking about its Connect functionality. Because they've been talking about how, like, it's all QuickTime events.
That's what
And you can't have QuickTime events if you don't have a controller. So did Rise abandon its Connect necessity?
It's still there. I'm pretty sure it's still there. I mean, well, ever since the Connect being a mandatory part of the Xbox One experience went away, maybe. But I still think it's the flagship Connect game.
Yeah, that's what I thought. It's just that when it was originally came out, it was the game, and I mocked it to death so we could all become Star Wars kid in our living room. It's just it's a ridiculous concept that anyone over the age of 8 really shouldn't be interested in, unless you're drunk, which is a different kind of consumer. And
well, I mean, then you're kind of 8 again.
Yeah,
there's 8
goes back
and
to the
drunk.
original point.
A little more hungry and a little more horny,
So
just like my 9th birthday.
But Josh, you mentioned seeing this go forward. You can't really see it happening or catching on without a big rethink, as you put it. But I think that's where the virtual reality stuff might come in, or at least hopes to come in. John Carmack recently joined Oculus VR as their CTO, working on the Rift headpiece, doing all their coding and stuff. And he's also complained publicly about how bad the Kinect is. He compared it to Apple's one-button mouse with a lot of latency, and everyone laughed. It was a good time. And but the thing is, I think that the future of these two technologies are really linked. And I was wondering, do you agree with that? Do you disagree with that? Do you think VR can stand on its own? Do you think motion technology can stand on its own? Or do you think that even together they won't make a cohesive product? Or an unmarketable product, even?
I think the problem that the VR runs into is it's like the beautiful thing off in the distance to have that Star Trek holodeck. But until you can actually get a force field to give you a tactile sensation, I don't know, again, if it's, I think it'll fall into the exact same pitfalls of just being a subpar experience, especially considering the extra necessary hardware requirements. Then that's, I mean, sure, as time goes on, they get cheaper and easier to get and smaller and more manageable, but this is a similar knock that I have against 3D movies in theaters. One, 3D is kind of a superfluous notion. Two, having to wear big stupid glasses is really irritating. And now I get to do that with my video games too? Hooray! Which I suppose works for a notion of VR or 3D in games, which I think is just as worthless. And until they can figure out that feeling it, I don't know if it's really marketable. I almost said worth it. I mean, of course it's worth it to keep making things better, but to actually market it as a product and expect to make money and want people to have fun doing it, no, I don't think so.
I mean, I think its problem is going to be all marketability. I just don't know, even if there are people who want to buy it, will they buy it? And will enough people buy it that it becomes a market that actually, that major companies want to invest money in? They want to...
Do they want to build games around it? That's the
right.
question. And then, but it's a cart before the horse. People have to actually show interest in it, and to show interest, you have to buy it. So like, it's this problem of like, you have to get enough people. And I am sort of interested in it. All the stuff that I've seen so far is kind of exciting.
Yeah, I mean, it looks really cool. I think everything that we've heard Carmack talk about in terms of really getting all the optical stuff just right, so that when you are looking at it, it doesn't feel like your eyes are just 3 inches from the screen. It really feels like you have this wide range of vision. There's so little latency on it now that when you look around, you're really looking around in real time, and just getting all of that stuff really, really right. And I think, at least in theory, being able to pair that with motion tracking for your body motion, and I imagine you would still have to have some kind of controller or prop gun or something like that. But that kind of setup could, again, in theory, be really, really cool and make a really immersive experience. But the problem is, who's going to drop $1,000 to have that in their living room?
It's a tough sell. And not that there's any technology that doesn't start off with a similar tough sell that requires a lot of investment from really eager early adopters. But the other thing that I think limits it is how many different kinds of games can you make to utilize it? If you're going to pay $1,000 for it, you want to get some mileage out of it. And are we still going to be restricted to games that are largely on rails?
This is true.
Because, I mean, if you can't get an actual experience if walking, even if we take away what I said about needing something tactile, if you want to actually be immersed in a world that you can see and hear, you want to be able to touch things. And we're not even close to that in our level of technology today. We're just starting what Disney's trying to use vibrations to simulate the textures of objects. So we convincingly can run your fingers along a screen, and it can vibrate in a manner that makes you believe that you're touching the texture that you see.
I did read something. There is a screen manufacturer that has started production, I think mass production, for some kind of phone or something like that, which actually has a very thin surface along the top that fills with liquid in certain places. Like it has little channels. It's like a little aqueduct or something. And that will raise or lower the surface that you run your finger across in a certain way. So you can sort of have, physical buttons on a flat touchscreen phone. So again, all of this stuff is really far out there. It's a long way off, but it could conceivably get wrapped up in this experience.
Could conceivably.
The only games that I could see, I mean, the games that I really think could benefit from this, and these are the games that I think we've talked about are going to be major sellers in the next generation, are open world games, where like you're dropped into this world and you're, just have free roam to do what you want.
You think open world?
Having the ability to look around and, use Oculus VR to your advantage in an open world game, I think would be really.
That sounds good.
Well,
How are you going to navigate the open world?
Yeah, I mean, I would think that a very vanilla shooter would be perfect for this kind of thing.
Yeah, this would be.
It's not ideal. I mean, an open world game would be great with it. But
yeah, maybe I'm just thinking a little too far.
Especially because I think most open world games are going to be third person. I mean, you have Skyrim.
Yes.
But I think by and large, they're third person games. I'm not sure if that's something that could be worked around. I'm sure we could figure out a way to do it.
Far Cry could be could be an example.
That's true.
But yeah, I'm just thinking of like games that I would want to play on Oculus VR. Like, yeah, I'd like to play an on the rails first person shooter where you just start here and you have to go there and you have to shoot people in the process. But like the ability, just thinking of like playing Skyrim on Oculus VR would be pretty amazing. I think it'd be pretty cool.
Yeah. I mean, it would be brilliant.
So, I mean,
but again, then you run into the problem.
Swing
the sword. Like how do you feel the weight of the sword? Do you feel the weight of the sword?
Yeah, and then going further,
do you just look like an asshole in your living room,
implementing stuff and just like going like just flailing your hands with this ridiculous thing on your face, and then someone walks in and says, "What the fuck are you doing?" That's a very big thing that I think about when I do not want
to. No, very few people do.
Yes,
it's true. All right, topic number 2 is, as I said earlier in the intro, my bold claim. I think that video games are not edgy enough. I think the only ways that video games are, and it's not even edgy, but I would say sort of offensive, at least to my ideals, is that they tend to be dumb or pander to a dumb audience. They're sort of pathetic representations of women, all of the macho action hero stuff, really bad dialogue, things like that. Things that you would see in like a typical action movie. But it sort of feels like that's all that the majority of video games are, and I think that's unfortunate, and I think it gives them a bad rap. And I think that they could be edgier in more interesting ways, and that would in fact do a lot for them and do a lot for the industry as a whole. I was wondering what you guys sort of thought about that. Do you agree or disagree?
I agree that there always needs to be someone pushing the envelope of what is acceptable and what is not acceptable. And I also think you're right that there have been the list of games that has been actually controversial in recent times is rather scarce. Because they just keep doing the same things. Grand Theft Auto 5 barely. I think some people tried to say that there was some controversial things in it just because people expect it, but really most of the news reporting has been how it's been the fastest selling game in the history of games. No real talk of killing prostitutes. We're so used to killing prostitutes, and we're so used to organized crime. If this is our traditional most edgy game, we've got a problem making edgy games. And like I said in the beginning, I think we should be making edgy games because in any form of art, you need people on the fringe pushing yourself outward, even if it doesn't mean forward. Maybe they do something so bad, you actually say, no, that's not what we want. And that's still good. That's still a collection of people in an art form making decisions and exploring new ideas. Stagnation isn't good for anyone. And I think Manhunt is one of those other beautiful classic Rockstar titles that had a whole bunch of controversy surrounding it.
I think that was the most...
Manhunt, is it Manhunt? Manhunter? Manhunt?
Manhunt.
Yeah.
Manhunt. I think it was a 2 as well.
There was a 2 again, but people were kind of over it. But Manhunt was a great game because it was... God, it was the first game that I was ever able to strangle someone with a plastic bag.
Plastic bag.
Yeah.
Strangulation, yeah.
I mean, just...
crazy.
And you just kind of watch them die.
Mm-hmm.
And it's quite an experience. It was edgy. It was violent to no end, and that's kind of what made it special. And it gave it its soul, and it gave it its character.
Well, I think there definitely aren't enough moments like that. But I think Grand Theft Auto 5 really did have a scene, the torture scene, the now sort of infamous torture scene, where you play as Trevor and you are torturing this guy, but he doesn't have, he doesn't really have any information, or he would have just told you the information anyway. You're kind of just torturing him more or less for fun at the whim of some other guy. But you can't skip it. You can't choose not to do it. And it really, it affects you. It really makes you cringe and makes you really think about the violence you're doing to this one person. For all of the other random people you've run over on the sidewalk or whatever, you really sort of feel this one thing, and you have to choose your torture device. And it, I think, acts as a really good mirror back at the player and says, this is what you find fun, you fuck.
I agree that it was a really cringeworthy scene, but I don't agree that I liked it. I think to me, it didn't give me anything that I found appealing, even on a satirical throwing back in my face what I'd been doing to other people, making me reflect what I was thinking.
No. I don't mean that you like the torture scene. I mean that you like playing the game.
I know exactly what you mean. I'm telling you I don't agree. I think it was worthless. I think it was an attempt at putting a shocking torture scene in the game, and even an attempt at being meta. But I didn't like it at all. I didn't see anything redeeming in it. Not to say that I was offended by it, but I thought it was just kind of pointless. And I thought that Rockstar could have done a lot better. I was very disappointed in the fact that I wasn't offended, even though it was cringeworthy, but it was like the lowest form of cringe. Like, if you want to make me cringe, do it for a good reason. And I didn't feel the good reason.
What would the good reason have been?
Well, I don't know, but I also don't think it should have been in the game. So I think what I'm saying is that there wasn't a good reason, so why is it in the game? The example you have written there is the Call of Duty No Russian mission. And having played that mission, it was a similarly cringeworthy mission. But it had more point. Because it was the first real scene of its kind. It was actually breaking territory in games. And it did further the story along. It was an integral part of the story, and it had a wonderful little plot twist at the end. When Call of Duty wasn't complete, it was still kind of, the story was out of this world ridiculous, but it was still close enough to be exciting, and you go through all these things because you're pretending to be a terrorist.
Right.
And then at the end, they pull you into the truck, and you actually get shot in the face as you take the step up. And you're like, oh my God, they just tricked me into doing this for them, and then they killed me, and the entire story pivots around this point, and it's a huge plot twist, and that gives it energy and excitement, and it makes it think, wow, that if I hadn't done that moment, this story would have fallen apart, and none of it would have meant anything. It gives you that motivation to continue on with the story against the enemy. Was that, what is his name? The FBI guy that makes you do that. He is an antagonist, But it didn't really spur me on to dislike him. There's plenty of other reasons to dislike him.
But it doesn't have to be a large narrative plot point.
It doesn't have to be. I'm just saying it could have been, and yet another thing that it wasn't.
Oh, sure, it could have been anything. But I think if it was anything, it was a further explanation of Trevor's character. And I think a lot of the random acts of violence that you see Trevor committing, or that you take part in committing as him, really furthers the idea that Trevor is the crazy dark side of every Grand Theft Auto player. Mm-hmm. The one that, in previous games, because you only have one protagonist, steals the car, runs over all the people, goes on a police chase, and then kills prostitutes and
then continues with the story and continues to be a good
right. And then he right. Whereas Trevor is the sort of personification of all of the bad shit that you are when you play Grand Theft Auto. And the other characters, as we've sort of talked about in previous podcasts, the other characters represent different parts of the sort of Trinity single character that they sort of are. But Trevor represents all of that dirty, rotten, evil shit. And I still believe that scene was holding a mirror up to the player, and it did show, I mean, what is different about torturing this person than giggling as you shoot people on the sidewalk? I mean, it's the same level of you're being a horrible human being, but we sort of laugh at one and just sort of forget about it in 30 seconds when we're doing a mission. But then there's this one that's part of the story that forces you to do it. It's not an option. And I think that means something. At least for me.
Yeah, I have to say it still doesn't mean anything to me, especially because you let him go. And he just kind of saunters off. And I suppose you could then say, well, it's another thing. But how many levels of meta meaning can you add on to something before it just kind of dissolves?
It was weird that,
if you really wanted to drive that home, we should have killed that motherfucker.
It was weird that, Trevor all of a sudden just said, come with me, I'm taking you to
and then he just kind of lets him go. I mean, if you wanted me to feel, at one point, for the only time in the game, feel regret for hurting a person, make me kill him, because I would have regretted that. That would have hit me right here.
No, but the point is that Trevor didn't feel regret about it. Trevor was basically doing his job. He had to do a job. He had to do that thing. And he did that thing. And then the guy left. And when he left, he said, all right, let's go. And he did the semi-decent thing by saying, get the fuck out of here. I'm not going to kill you. Let me take you to the airport. You got to go.
Yeah, but I don't see why. Why would he do that?
Because he's crazy. But he's not... but he's not just a mindless killer. He doesn't kill everything because he can. He has more depth than just that.
I agree that Trevor has more depth, but I don't see what that scene taught me. And why? Why did he choose that? Was there something? Did he like his family story? Was he touched by his?
Because the job wasn't to kill the guy. The job was to torture him for information. He got his information. He has no beef with the guy other than that at all. He doesn't. He has nothing wrong.
Right. Well, why did he drive him to the airport?
Because he's doing him a favor.
This is the part. If he just said, all right, well, goodbye. From my understanding of Trevor, if he didn't need to kill him. Well, why let him go? I mean, just walk away. That's the Trevor that I understand. He wouldn't. I don't believe Trevor would kill him just because he could. But I don't understand why he drove him to the airport either. I mean, he just
sometimes
leave him tied to a chair. All right, well, you're free to go, and just walk out of the room.
I was with the torture scene. I was getting the whole. I agree on a certain point that Trevor in that scene kind of represented us in for a second it slowed down the violence and it made you think about the violence. But then it didn't ruin it, but it just made me kind of feel what when he dropped him off at the airport. It's what was that? Okay, it's over. I didn't get the point.
Well, first of all, I think
maybe it doesn't have a point. We're all thinking too deep into it.
I think the conversation that they have in the car does sort of provide some comedic relief as well. There is the torture advocacy thing, which is whatever. But sure, I mean, I would accept that maybe that bit could have been cut. But I think the torture scene as a standalone piece, I thought was effective.
Oh, it definitely made you cringe, and like that's like we've talked about. There's so few moments in video games that make you cringe.
But I think we're getting hung up on one single point here. We're just kind of debating that. We could talk about the Tomb Raider attempted rape, or what Crystal Dynamics then sort of took back and said, "Oh no, that wasn't going to be a rape." But I mean, if anyone watched the trailer, she was clearly going to be raped, or played the game. It was in the game when they shipped it. And why couldn't it have been? Again, that's in no way advocating rape. It's but saying what is the difference between saying, yeah, I mean he's like this crazy guy on an island, and that's what he does with people they capture. They capture them, and then they rape them, and then they kill them, and then eat their bodies or something.
Yeah, it's totally logical.
Like, why not? And that provides you with even more justification.
I don't understand why they had to take it back.
And if I'm thinking correctly here, isn't that the first person she kills, too?
Yeah.
Like, that's the first time she kills anyone. Is, like, I mean, it's that or shit's gonna get really, really bad. So sure, yeah, I mean, that's a perfect justification to use lethal force on someone. And she does. And so I think, saying, oh, no, we would never want to go that extreme. I mean, you throughout the course of the game, she kills God knows how many people, but we can't have an attempted rape.
Yeah.
That totally makes sense in that situation. It's just other weird things. And again, it's not, you're not the one attempting the rape, obviously. It's not,
It's weird that, like, we're okay with certain types of violence, but, like, other types of violence, like rape and torture, like, no, hands off. Like, can't touch that in a video game. It's so weird.
But I think a lot of it comes down to as well, and again, it is still weird, but the fact that you have in other forms of media, you're simply the observer. You're watching other characters do this, whereas in a video game, you're the one controlling it. And I still think it's weird that we can't have any video games that even deal with rape or some torture, I suppose, but like heavier things that aren't just regular killing. I mean, it comes down as well to sexual content. There are people who are fine with killing as long as no one shows a nipple, but that doesn't make any sense at all.
It doesn't. I think it should have been. I think the game could have been helped by having a more explicit attempt at rape. I think you're right. For a myriad of reasons. I think it gives her. It really helps to justify her first kill, to add a lot of weight into that scene, to show a real transformation of character. For what does it take for a harmless, educated, wealthy person to turn into someone like that? You really want to sell that moment. You have to up those stakes, and I think there's nothing wrong with exploring that world. And you're right that we are afraid to explore worlds of sexuality, but it's just as relevant as violence. In fact, sexual assault is even more common in the world than violence itself.
This is true.
And you could use that to argue that it's something we might even need to be talking about more. In the United States, what happens more? Do people get gunned down by random acts of grand theft violence? Or are people sexually assaulted on a daily basis? Which one is more important to understand? And talking about things is a great way to understand it. Like, that's like, you could almost say that's like a civic duty. If games are going to go down this artistic path and they're going to show us these things, you have to bring this baggage along with it too. Because the interactivity of games, I don't know if I've talked about this before, I think is really helpful. As opposed to the claims that violence in video games desensitizes us to violence and somehow makes us okay with violence. In fact, I believe that games teaches us how wrong violence is, particularly these really painful torture scenes. Doing that to someone really doesn't feel good. It doesn't feel good at all. Even a virtual person, it does not come close to being okay. So putting these things in games, I think, is a valuable lesson for people. And this is not, I mean, you could say that the next thing I'm going to say is we should have a game where you have to rape someone. I don't know if we should go with that. I don't know if we're ready for that. I'm open to that idea in the future in terms of progress, but I'm not sure we should just jump into it. But the concept of showing us what an awful thing it is by making us live it in a first-person situation, I think is really powerful, and it's something that games alone have the ability to show.
That's
Social advocacy via interactive entertainment.
right, and I think a big reason why they haven't done that so far is because no one can actually do that in a convincing way or in a mature way.
Yeah, I don't see.
It's a hard thing. Like there's a line that's real easy to step over. It's a very, very, very fine line.
Yeah. This is true. And
because like you said, like the torture scene did nothing for you. I mean, just imagine if there was a rape scene somewhere and like it did nothing. Like it'd just be awful. Like the line would be so razor thin.
If there was a claim of a gratuitous first-person rape scene, that's not the other side of an accusation that I want to be on. Nor would I want any. No one wants to be on that side of an accusation, which is probably why no one's attempted anything like it.
No. I also think no one's attempted it just because I don't think it would be useful to have a rape scene. I don't.
Well, I mean, now it wouldn't be useful. But I think if you dial the clock back 25 years, the thought of making you torture someone in a first-person idea is equally unthinkable. I'm just trying to long term. We're going to keep pushing the boundaries of things. We're going to have to tread into territories that we haven't been in before. That's just kind of a logical 1 + 1 = 2 statement.
And again, I think it's also important to note that video games are not always about fun. Fun is not the end goal of a video game. Sometimes it is.
Mm-hmm. All kinds of games.
Fun is involved in some form, but especially with games becoming more of just immersive worlds and experiences, you sometimes do things that make you uncomfortable, that make you think, or that sort of give you pause and make you really consider your actions. Again, as the torture scene. I mean, if we had an entire game of, well, this game is you torture people.
Who would buy that game?
Well, shit, I don't want to buy that
That's
game.
a disturbing game to buy.
That's depressing, that's disturbing. You should be very concerned if people are picking this up, because there is no enjoyment to be gained out of that. And so I think, as you were saying, Josh, you can have experiences in the future when it can be done well or done convincingly, where you have, these heavy issues like sexual assault being tackled, and even in a first-person way, whether you are on the receiving end of something like that, could be incredibly disturbing.
It would single-handedly be the most disturbing thing in the history of video games.
And I think that could also, that could be a really important thing too, to sort of show people, like, this awful shit happens all the time. Here's a virtual taste of how awful and deplorable this sort of stuff is. And I think it could be really enlightening for a lot of people. And I think it could also take interactive narratives to a much more mature place, and give them the ability to tell stories and explore narratives and interactive narratives that they wouldn't have otherwise been able to touch, because it just the form wouldn't have allowed it.
I think this conversation has definitely taken a turn for the dark, but it effectively showcases the point we're trying to make with this second topic, that games are not edgy enough, has nothing to do with selling the game, and it doesn't even have anything to do with shocking you. It's not about the joy you get from being surprised. It's that when you push boundaries is really where you're going to find the ability to make new art, things that haven't been done before. And new art that isn't just pretty to look at, but art that is actually functional. Art that as you said, you feel with the way that scene works, art that holds a mirror up to you, up to your society, up to everyone in the world. And throughout history, the most important things that have ever happened in art have been the things that challenge us on that. Things that are political and things that are humanist.
Dark and disturbing.
Dark and disturbing because this is the exploration of dark and disturbing things that are true. And it's the best way to show it to people. The biggest problem with sexual assault in the country right now is that we don't talk about it. People get raped on college campuses every day because I think people honestly don't know how staggering the numbers are of people who take advantage of girls who are too drunk to take care of themselves. What are the numbers? 1 in 4 women will be sexually assaulted in this country?
Something like that, yeah.
And no one's talking about it in media?
Or, well, no one's talking about it in a mature
way. Or no one's talking about it in the serious light that it needs to be,
right,
in a mainstream fashion. Sure, there's tons of little art house films that are talking about it,
right.
Viewed by how many people?
Irreversible.
People who already know these things and have been seeking these things out. But if we were to use video games as that mainstream launch, I mean, you want to raise issues, there you go.
But this, do we have time?
Yeah.
Okay. But this is like the crux of me with the problem. We were talking about this earlier. Like, games fundamentally are about gameplay and, like, I don't know. It's like.
Yes.
Trying to get.
Yeah.
What am I trying to get? What am I trying to get at?
We were talking earlier before we were recording, of course, about Heavy Rain and how Heavy Rain really doesn't have a gameplay mechanic.
Right.
There's no one repetitive thing you do that makes that you could say this is the game. Check. It's just it's a long narrative that you just kind of play and you do things as it tells you to do them.
You don't get better at Heavy Rain. You don't play it until you get better at it.
It's not skill based necessarily. I mean, it is. There are QuickTime things, but it's like you said. The best way of putting it is that you can't get better at it. And at least for me, I think that's where I would like to see things go. I really think that is the future, or the future I want to see anyway, of video games. And it's not to say that games with repetitive action or shooters or RPGs aren't fun. I love them all. I don't love them all. I love them, in their little boxes. But I really think in terms of where you're going to get the most meat out of a narrative or a really great interactive experience is going to be in experiences like that.
Oh, I think it will fracture and diversify like everything else we've seen. I think film is the easiest way to look at it because film is the second youngest form of art. Video games are now the new kid on the block, but it was only 80 years ago that film was the new kid on the block. And it took many decades for people to figure out how many things could it be. And how many, it hasn't stopped. Art never stops fracturing and moving on.
Sure.
And just look at how many different kinds of movies are there today. I mean, there are blockbuster movies, there's funny movies, there are very serious movies, there's movies without dialogue at all. There's movies that are nothing but a series of images. There's movies that are animated. You can hardly think of an idea for a type of movie that someone hasn't already made or is in the process of making. And games have not diversified this much, and I think we're going to see that. So I think you're right that we need to have more of these interactive story games, but I'm going to wrap this back around to why you started talking. I think it's true that we shouldn't lose games that are gameplay oriented, but I don't think we will.
No, we never will.
I mean, that is where they started.
It's how we got it.
There will always be fun, happy skill-based games. Shooting your friends, playing tennis, things that you do in an entertaining way that are less about the art and the storytelling. No one goes to see Transformers for the story. Who does that? No one does that.
I think you'd be surprised.
I might be surprised,
but they shouldn't, or they think they're going for the story. In fact, they are wrong.
No, they're going for the spectacle of it all, and those will always exist. And it's not to say that there isn't a place for exciting spectacle. It's fun. But if you've got some money to blow in 3 hours, and you're just going to sit home looking at your dick, you might as well go look at huge explosions. Man has been faced with this problem from the beginning of time. You could look at your dick, or you could look at some explosions.
That's our cue. Topic number 3, Game of Thrones.
Oh. We're just getting on a roll.
Game of Thrones. I will posit this. Game of Thrones is a show without themes. Josh, go.
That is correct. It is a show...
All right, that's the show. We're done.
It is a show about a group of characters. And he just created a world, and he created some characters, and he hit play, and now we're just seeing what happens. It's kind of a sandbox story. You know, I'm convinced, I'm not sure that I don't know if he has plans. He apparently has plans for how it ends, but is there an overarching story? Sort of?
Sort of.
Would I be surprised if he upended everything and said, no, we're going to go in a new direction now? I wouldn't be surprised at all.
No, he's very much a just fly by the seat of his pants writer. He's talked about this a lot. There's 2 different types of writers. There's architects who like structure out the entire story, and then there's gardeners who just plant and they go along and they just oh, this story works, I'll go with this. Oh, this story works. Oh, this doesn't work, I'm gonna cut back this.
Mm-hmm.
He's just said, I'm just making this shit up as I go along. And like, how amazing is that? This gigantic story with millions of characters and thousands of places. And he's just saying,
that's how it works. That's how life is.
Yeah.
It's just
that's true.
And it has that feel of just characters really going about their business.
It almost feels like a soap opera in that regard.
So.
Yeah.
It's like a soap opera in Westeros.
Yeah.
With lots of nudity and violence.
Which,
occasionally
if soap operas were in Westeros, I imagine they would need to have nudity and violence.
Occasionally a dragon shows up. And
Occasional dragon, yeah.
Occasional dragons.
Misa.
Pizza.
That's a gif. Look it up. But, I mean, let's talk about the lack of themes. I think that's really important. Is that it doesn't, I mean, at least as far as I can tell, have themes. Are there, I mean, like, because in other shows you have, like, seasons are defined by a theme, or you have a season arc. But the show just doesn't exist.
It doesn't.
At all.
I agree that it's important in terms of defining the show as what it's doing. I don't believe it's a detriment. In terms of everything else we've seen happen in 20th century art, this is kind of the way people like to do things. You can choose to be really formal, or you can choose to be really freeform. Bring in my music here. When the 20th century happened in music, people really started experimenting with what things could be art and what things could not be art. Essentially, we answered, there's nothing that cannot be art. Whereas if you look at this from a classical or an early romantic point of view, there was a really set way of doing things. And this is, what are your themes? Quite literally, what are your themes? There need to be 2 themes in a sonata. There has to be one theme, there has to be another theme. You have to explore those themes, and by the end, you need to hear those other themes come back. That's the way it works. And the 20th century happened, and we said, I don't want to. I'm just going to do what I want to do. Debussy came along and said, I'm more interested in color and orchestration. So when you listen to Debussy, you're not listening for themes to come back. You're not listening for hidden messages. You're letting this wash of color hit you for 40 minutes, and then it's going to go away.
I think...
if I could just ask a question.
Yeah.
Did you guys read... I haven't read. Have you guys read Lord of the Rings trilogy?
I've read all of the Fellowship, and I read half of Two Towers, and I didn't...
Would you say those books have themes? Because I've never read them, so I wouldn't know. But I'm just trying to compare it to something else comparable.
I think Tolkien is the closest thing.
The only thing I can think of is a fantasy.
I'd say Tolkien has more themes, although he is in a similar idea of plant and go.
Yeah, I think Tolkien is interesting because Tolkien writes these novels like a history book.
Yeah.
Or at least that's the vibe you get when you read them, is that everything is, it's so rich and lush and detailed in its descriptions, which is, I think, of huge benefit to Peter Jackson in the original trilogy when he filmed it. But the description is such that it makes you feel that way. And I think, like Josh said, there are themes, or at least more themes than in Game of Thrones, which is to say none. but I think less so than your typical novel.
Okay. If I could just put one potential theme out there and shoot it down if you like.
We will.
Could
We will steambox you.
I'm ready.
Go
I'm
on.
ready. Could power and like lust for power and acquisition of power and keeping power, could that be a theme?
I mean, I agree that's a theme, although I think it's too vague
Yeah.
to be
this
considered
is
a
one
theme
thing
in,
I'm
tr-
worried
in the
about.
traditional story sense of themes. Themes are supposed to be specific things. You can measure them in specific actions through specific characters. That is a theme in Game of Thrones, but it's kind of the overall motivation for everyone. It's why they do things. Which, if you're going to say it like that, it's just kind of a study in how people work. So is it a theme, or is it just, this is how people are in the real world, and we're watching them do what we do? Using that kind of just brings you back to the original point. So I kind of shot you down, but A for effort.
Thank you.
I'll go with B for effort. I'm not quite so. They've done a lot of recasting. Tommen has been recast, right?
Mm-hmm.
Schupsky. Who else? Can you
The
think
Mountain
of?
got recast last season.
Fabio Long-Harris.
That was way back in season 1.
Right, Fabio
Fabio
Long-Harris.
Oh yeah, that's right. He's gonna be a new guy.
Yeah.
Well, I liked his long hair.
Well, I liked. Yeah, I think
I mean,
it's really. I think it's weird. I didn't get the scoop on what happened with that. If they just changed their mind, or if it was like a scheduling thing. But I think it's really weird that they had him in such a large role at the end of this season.
That one, I
Just
think
to,
we'll feel the strange.
That will feel really weird because the Mountain, you only saw him like one episode in season 1,
Right.
And then he's back in season,
oh,
and he's
and-
really still a big character. But
I have no idea what the mountain looked like. I don't even remember, so I don't even
Exactly.
care.
big burly guy. But
That's all I know.
But that's the point. Like you don't realize it. But this guy,
Then also, oh man,
Beric Dondarrion.
yes, Beric Dondarrion was
Beric Dondarrion.
recast.
Let's see. There's so many names.
He's the guy with.
Who did he double cross?
Who did he have sex with? Is the real question.
Yeah.
He's the guy who is the head of the banner. The
Brotherhood without
Brotherhood
He
without
keeps
banners.
getting resurrected.
Oh, they recast him?
Yeah.
Yeah, he was
in one scene in season 1. He was just some guy with a beard.
And,
And they already did recast. I thought he was upcoming to be
No.
recast.
He was recast.
from season 1, and you had Ned Stark sent him out to go
find the mountain.
Find the mountain.
Okay,
right.
but again, that still kind of falls into the mountain
Like
character, because when you finally
he's
got
only
to
in
meet
one
him,
scene.
you didn't remember.
Yeah,
who he
he's only in
was.
one scene, so
Sure,
it
it's
doesn't
not
really
that
matter.
big a deal.
But yeah, what is that guy's name that is with Danny? The
Fabio Long-Harris.
Fabio
I don't remember
Long-Harris.
what his real name is.
Dario
Naharis.
Yeah.
Dario Naharis.
Fabio Long-Harris is
Yeah.
a better name.
Yeah. Well, I was confused when I first saw him because I mean they obviously don't go completely off the book, but in the book he's just like this crazy looking motherfucker. He's got like a spiky beard and like his beard is blue. He's got blue hair.
Yeah, they do tone down how crazy some of the people
Yeah.
look. Like in like the Bravusi
And-
are all supposed to look like
All
crazy and
really weird.
have like big
But
flowy clothes.
have we
and-
seen what the new Dario Naharis looks like? Has anyone?
I have
haven't.
not.
I
I do
see
not
that.
know who it is exactly.
But that is going to.
Is he going to keep cop blocking Ser Jorah?
I would imagine
we
yes.
We will have to wait and see.
We'll have to
for
find
season 4.
out.
But I mean, it's interesting because yeah, like a show like this is the only show that I know that's like so. It helps that there's so many characters, but it's the only show I know that's so okay with recasting. Recasting is usually a pretty big deal on a show, and in this it's like it's already happened like 6 times.
Yeah, they've done it with a bunch of different
Yeah.
characters. It's like, oh, well, now this character is important. We better
get a
better-
a real actor.
Yeah, we need a real actor. Not
At a
just one that
certain
sits
point, they
around.
should probably introduce like a regeneration story element just to,
Yeah,
just to
like
keep it
Dr.
going.
Who, Dr. Who. Yeah, that could work.
Mhm.
Totally. Well, and not to give anything away, so this is going to be relatively spoiler-free, providing you are current with the TV show. So that's the end of season 3, should be the midpoint of book 3. We won't really talk about anything specific after that, just kind of general terms. But D.B. Weiss, David Benioff have said, I think, quite frequently that the Red Wedding was the reason they wanted to make the show in the first place. Now that we've had that happen, and it's not to say that nothing else happens in book 3, but I think book 4 and 5 do slow down considerably. And so once you've had the sort of pinnacle moment, at least so far in what Martin has written, where do we go from here? I mean, if the story or the story of the show is just these characters in interesting situations interacting with one another, and you take all of the interesting situations away or make them less interesting than they have been in the past, is that enough to keep our interest? Or will the show go downhill? Or will they have to deviate significantly from the books?
I think Book 6 will give us a good indication of that. I mean, not giving anything away. Books 4 and 5, if I can describe them, are just peace movers. It's moving everybody into place. And we're going to have to see what happens in Book 6 to, like, say, okay, interesting stuff is happening. It's just going to take a while. I think, I've said this before, I think what they're going to do with Books 4 and 5, I think they're going to smush them together and make one season. Kind of like how they separated Book 3 because there was so much happening in Book 3. Consequently, there's not a lot happening in Books 4 and 5. I think they can easily put those together and have the story move a little bit quicker. Like, because, I mean, we obviously don't want to talk too much about it, but I'm just, like, thinking of what they could change to make it interesting. Like, and I don't know.
Well, I mean, we have a lot more of Theon.
We saw a lot of Theon.
Yeah.
I know this. Oh yeah, this is one thing we talked about. A lot of characters that we haven't seen for a while in the books, because you have the luxury of doing that with a book. If you just completely forget about a character for a long period of time, you can't forget about a character for like 5 episodes in a TV show. It just doesn't work like that. Maybe we could see more, like they can just fill in the gaps for these characters that we haven't seen a lot of, like they did with Theon.
Right.
Although I will say I didn't really like the Theon stuff. I don't know. I just thought it was a little bit like.
Well, there was so much of it.
So
it was
much
the
of
same thing. And maybe that was kind of
over.
the point to like make you feel the exhaustion of like, oh
Yeah.
my god, what else can they do to this poor
They were
guy?
terrifying
They
scenes.
were. They were.
In fact,
it's
as we were discussing the torture scene in GTA, I remembered pulling the bone out of his finger again.
Ugh.
And it really... I feel helpless and hopeless along with him anytime I see him in that room. I just can't. My sense of dread, if I had a dread meter, it would be Old Faithful. It would just blow out of the top of my head, my dread meter.
But like this is the problem. Like, what are they going to do with him in season 4? Like, more of the same? I don't want more of that.
I don't have the fortitude.
I can't take that. I can't take any more of that. But this is the problem. Like, he's a character that was very much in the background in season 3, or I mean, book 3. But they brought him to the forefront in season 3.
Was he in book 3?
No.
Well, that's a little more than background.
Well,
because the characters assume that he's dead.
There was
Right.
one thing that I don't know if I want to say.
You should know.
And I shouldn't say
you
because
say.
I get on a roll and I do
Yeah.
something stupid all the time. This happens. This is a problem.
Yeah, you say things you shouldn't.
But
Let's skip over that. Let's talk about the interesting gender dynamic in the series. Men kind of control all the seats of power because this is obviously it's a replication of like a feudal
society,
Europe,
feudal rules. Yes.
It's patriarchal. Men control all the seats of power. But my question is, do women in Westeros in fact run the show? And I think it was interesting during the last season of Game of Thrones, Slate actually ran female power rankings per week. They sort of, ranked who actually had the most power that week in through all of the female characters. Who was exerting their influence the most, who was rising and falling. And I thought that was really interesting because it sort of showcased how many of the female characters really do, have the ability to pull all of these strings and make all of these things happen. And so it's just, do men actually control things, or are the women...
I think it depends on which house we're talking about and which area of the world.
That could also be true.
I mean, men certainly have a lot of power, but it's correct to say that he has written a lot of very strong female characters, and not just strong in will, but strong in politics. One of our main, Daenerys. She's on a march to take the throne, and she's got dragons, and she's making cities fall before her. A rather strong female character. She doesn't even have... She has men that answer to her, and she doesn't even have to act, through other people. Whereas we see in Westeros proper, we see strong women acting through men.
More behind the scenes, yes.
With the exception, as I pointed out to Schupsky before, of Lady Olenna.
God, I love that bitch. I just love her to bits.
So say we all. She is really like the only one who can directly, I think, exert.
We show that right in her.
She's very clearly the leader of that.
Yeah, across the table scene with Tywin.
Right. Yeah. She is going toe to toe with Tywin fucking Lannister, and just wipes the floor with him. Mm-hmm. It's like that wonderful Tumblr post. It's gay, incest. Go back and forth. But yeah, well, what about the ones that aren't so cut and dried? What about the
Cersei? I think is the most
interesting.
The most interesting because does she really have power, and is she?
I think this is one of the key points of her characters. Yeah. It kind of goes back and forth when Cersei can, in alternating weeks, appear incredibly powerful and then incredibly weak.
Incredibly predictable is one. And there was this great quote in one of the books, actually, where Peter Baelish actually said, she fancies herself a player of this Game of Thrones. Really, she's just a pawn. She's just being played.
Which is something I think of, because every time I think of Cersei having so much power, I mean, is it her or is it Tywin? I mean, I think under her father, whose plans are really being enacted here? She tries to manipulate her son. She's losing her grip on her son.
Well, Marjorie's far better.
And Marjorie is supplanting her, and we're watching that supplication. No, that's a providing something. Either way, Marjorie is pushing her out the window, and this is her current character dilemma. If we take away her power over her son, what does she have left? And now she's kind of revealed, I think, perhaps is just having always been playing into her father's wishes.
Yes.
A false power, like Baelish says.
Yeah.
Right.
And the fact that she just doesn't know what to do with this power when it is, in fact, presented to her. Like, she likes to think of herself as really smart and cunning, but really she's just very bitter. And, all of the things she does are just... There's nothing...
They're very short-sighted.
They're very short-sighted, exactly. Mm-hmm. Exactly.
I think there are interesting parallels with Jaime in that, too.
Always,
yes.
It helps that they're doing it, but... And I haven't thought about this show. It's been off. I love Jaime so much.
He really, yeah. Jaime's one of the.
Jaime doesn't have a hand.
If we could just go off on a tangent here. Jaime is one of the most surprisingly pleasant characters in Game of Thrones because you start off just despising the man.
Oh yeah, he's just such a dickhead. But then he's just not such a dickhead.
But the thing is, he stays a dickhead.
Well, yeah, okay, so he is a dickhead. He's just a sympathetic dickhead.
Perfect. Yeah, he's so.
And I think it's relevant for a female topic because his hair is very nice.
Yes, of course.
Well, unless we count the time when he was imprisoned and it got all gross.
Yeah,
it was still nicer than most people's hair in Westeros.
That we can agree with. Well, what about Brienne?
Oh,
so we have politically powerful women. We have other sorts of power. We have manipulative power and cunning, and then we have physical power,
brute force. Which, Brienne, since we were talking about Jaime, I mean that was our primary window in there. Yeah. I mean, she kicks ass in a very traditional sense.
Right.
We kind of do. We've got a strong women of every type. Take your pick in this world.
Arya.
Just speak nothing of Arya.
Just a mini Brienne.
It's true. I mean, though she's gearing up a little sneaky.
I think she's gearing up to be a little sneak
behind
your back kind of person. But to get back to Brienne, I loved the fight scene between Jaime and Brienne. It was a little bit better done in the book, but no matter. But like, I loved that scene. Of,
Oh
like,
yeah, I didn't actually love the scene. I loved what it meant.
I loved what it meant. Exactly. I loved what they were going for in that scene. In the book, it's amazing. They fight in the river and they get all like muddy and dirty, and like it's like a chapter long fight basically, and then it ends when the brother without banners fight. No. The Northerners. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Northerners fight. But
Yeah.
I love the meaning behind that fight, in that like Brienne proves like, I'm just as good as any one of y'all. Like I can do it. So like I can I can fight as best with any. So like, yeah, the physical strength, the political strength, Arya's quasi physical and assassin type strength.
Well,
So-
just
Yeah.
Arya being a
Arya.
badass.
Now, here's an interesting point if we're talking about powerful women. There's an interesting parallel to non-powerful women. What's her name? Catelyn's sister.
Lysa.
Yeah, I think she is a woman in power, but she's also kind of a nutcase.
Well, yeah. I mean, I think that's not such a great example because she is actually like
Crazy.
mental.
Right. Well, see what I'm saying. I'm not saying she's a good example of a woman in power.
Right.
She's a good example of George's his gender equality throughout the story.
Sure. Yeah. Right. Right.
That she, for all of our strong, wonderful, you go girl women, we've got this kind of crazy bitch who has a, crazy son.
Crazy crippled son.
Crazy crippled son.
Who's sucking on her breasts at 9 years old, and
Yeah.
it's a disturbing motion, but it's something that we have seen in so many male characters throughout all of history. And how often do you get a deranged, kind of psychopathic female power source?
Right.
In this kind of world.
In this
Yeah.
kind of world, I can't think of a single other example. I mean, I'm sure if you go into the bowels of fantasy novels in your local Barnes and Noble, you can find something. But if we're talking mainstream worlds here,
Do dark elves count? Moving on. Marjorie. Let's talk about Marjorie.
Oh yeah,
Yes.
Marjorie.
First of all, love Marjorie.
Yeah.
She's brilliant.
She's brilliant.
And Natalie Dormer is fucking gorgeous, obviously.
Yeah. But like Natalie,
that face, she's got that face,
Natalie.
that
Marjorie-
sass
Yeah,
face.
that sass face. She has the
face.
best sass
Sass
face
face.
ever.
Yeah.
But she
Marjorie
knows
actually,
how to manipulate Joffrey so well.
Best scene is when he was
The crossbow.
crossbow scene, and he was like, "Oh, can you show me?" And like the way she like tamed him, but at the same time made him feel like he was telling her what's what. Like it was brilliant.
Oh yeah,
She
it was
is-
brilliant. It's great.
She's like everything Cersei wanted to be.
Yeah.
Pretty much, yeah.
Just-
Yeah, because
again, her
she
problem.
knows how to put on her happy queen face. Oh, hello, masses. Yes, I'm coming to the poor people's home. That's what I do. I'm a queen. I'm a loving queen. But then she also has her like conniving, scheming mind of always knowing what to do. Brilliant. And she's one of the few characters where like I have no idea what her goal is. I don't know what exactly. What are the Tyrells in general? What
It's
do they
true.
want?
And, I love them so far.
Yeah,
I really
because they're so
I'm on their side.
They're
but
unreadable for me. Like, obviously, they want power, but like, what's their end game? It's just
Or like, how do they want to get?
how do
that
they
power?
want to get that power?
Are they happy just sort of pairing up with the
Pairing up with
Lannisters,
the
or are they
Lannisters?
just trying to wipe them out? Very.
And this is the thing. Like, I don't know with Marjorie, and that's the thing that makes her so like such an interesting character to me. So, but I mean, yeah, and then well, no, not gonna say because I shouldn't.
Yeah.
I was gonna do it again.
All right.
I can't.
Final question. Favorite character.
Do it. Tyrion.
I mean, I love Tyrion, but is he my favorite?
I mean, Tyrion though. He's the god of tits and wine.
Yes, he is. He is the god of tits and wine. I guess. I mean, don't put me on the spot here, but yeah, I love Tyrion, but I love Jaime. Just to be different, I'm going to say Jaime.
Okay. I can
respect that.
I can completely get down with that pick. 'Cause-
Although we didn't talk about Shay, but I think Shay is another also great example of a totally different kind of strong female character. She fits a more traditional supplanting role to Tyrion. Tyrion is the dominant force, but he also kind of melts into her. She doesn't. I don't think Shay manipulates Tyrion,
No, but
they have a very interesting dynamic,
yeah,
and
they have
she
a very-
definitely has got her own spunk going on.
definitely.
All right.
I'll go with that. I'll go with that as well.
I'm glad we've reached a consensus.
Could we just quickly do our second favorite character?
You just
Say it. Mike Schupsky.
Starting with you.
Oh.
But don't do that. I thought you had someone. No.
This is on you, buddy. What's your
Don't
second
throw me
favorite
under the
character?
bus.
Well, you said favorite character and you brought it off to me. So why do I have to go first?
Because you came up with the idea of second character.
Which means I don't have to answer first.
This wasn't part of the plan, Mike.
All right.
Part of the plan.
I'll start off. This is where it gets tough because after Tyrion,
I hate you.
and this is why I didn't.
My second
answer
favorite
first.
character, Fabio Long Harris.
Fabio. Okay.
The guy that says Misa. That's my Misa.
Well, you just fucked up my segment, didn't you?
Yep.
You just fucked it
Well,
up.
if you'd had a plan, you fucked it up
What's
yourself.
your
You
second
didn't.
favorite?
I was just going for a spontaneous fun. I guess it was. Okay, so mission accomplished. I'm done.
Good.
I'm glad for a second week in a row the podcast is imploding. Alright, so that's all for this week. If you enjoyed the podcast, be sure to like us at facebook.com/live2play. Check our page regularly for updates and links to interesting things, including those featured in this week's A2Pcast. For Mike Schupsky and Josh Hartman, I'm Mike Rifenbury. Thanks for listening.